So welcome and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brianna Mihalovich, and I am the Professional Development Coordinator here at Campus Compact. We are so excited about our partnership with the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship as co-creators of this series. ACES is an organization that recognizes exceptional leaders who live at the intersection of academics and communities to benefit society. And together we bring you this series on addressing wicked issues through community engaged scholarship. This year, the series is focusing on our climate and our health, exploring the impacts of climate change on health and how higher ed can make a difference. Leading the charge in this conversation is Campus Compact's Design Fellow, Rebecca Forsythe. Before I hand things off to Rebecca, I do want to highlight just some other ways that you can get involved with Campus Compact. If you're interested in Campus Compact's professional development offerings, I have a link that I will drop in the chat where you can learn more and explore our upcoming programs and events. We have a lot of exciting things coming up, especially in the summer, so I encourage you to check it out. And then, of course, if you have any questions, you can always email our professional development team at our prof dev email, which I will also drop that in the chat. And now that those links are shared, I will go ahead and pass things off to Rebecca.
Perfect. Hi, guys. So thank you so much for coming to our second session for our Wicked Issue series on climate change and health. We had a great first kind of speaker session to set the stage for our understanding on how climate change affects health with Dr. Jonathan Patz, which was amazing. And that will be on Campus Compact's YouTube page in the coming weeks. But now we're moving into our sessions that are more focused on kind of particular interventions we might take as professionals and educators in higher education. So we have a lovely panel discussion today. It's focused primarily on addressing the effects of climate change on health through research and public problem solving, particularly community engaged research. So we have a great panel of experts here to share their expertise on how they utilize research and public problem solving to address these effects, with a range of specialties, including participatory action research. We have some environmental and climate justice going on, and extensive policy knowledge. I just want to remind folks that as we're kind of going through our panel discussion and questions, that if you have questions that come up, we'll have a Q&A portion later in this session. So as we hear from panelists, if questions kind of come out into your mind, feel free to drop those into the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll be able to get to those as they come up. So I'd like to now introduce our lovely panelists. So first we have Dr. Katie Dickinson, who is an interdisciplinary scholar of environmental and occupational health at the Colorado School of Public Health. We have Dr. Kyle Exhill, Assistant Professor of Environmental Health Sciences at University of Minnesota. And then lastly, we have Dr. Luisa Diele-Viegas. She is a conservation biologist and postdoc at Michigan State University and a researcher, I just found out, at University of Oregon. So class for that. So it's so lovely to have you all. So our first kind of question is more so getting a feel for who you guys are. And so can you give us and our attendees a brief description of who you are and how your work relates to the intersection of climate change and health? And whoever'd like to start is more than welcome to kind of pipe in.
I can jump in. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this and inviting me to be a part of a discussion that I'm really excited to learn from the other folks on the panel here. Like Becca said, I'm Katie. I'm a Colorado girl, born there, but have spent time in every U.S. continental time zone, fun fact, and multiple other countries for different periods of time. I've been back in Colorado since 2010, and it definitely feels like my kind of true home. I've always loved outdoor spaces and had a real passion for solving environmental problems since my dad got me a book when I was a kid called 50 Ways to Save the Earth. So that really stuck with me. It was 50 simple ways, and what I've learned over time is that it is not simple. In fact, it is a wicked problem. But through the work that I've done, so in my dissertation for my PhD, I looked at problems including sanitation in India and malaria in Tanzania. really focusing kind of earlier in my career on these real global inequities in access to clean and healthy environments. And in the last decade, I've really shifted to looking more locally. So wildfire and air pollution are kind of two key topics in this climate space, very relevant to Coloradans, and clearly very connected to climate. So, across those different projects and geographies, some of the key themes in my work, again, have been these sort of inequities and how we think about the drivers of those, how we think about human behaviors and policies and decisions, and how we can kind of work within the structures that exist, but also thinking about changing the structures that exist to help all communities thrive and move towards, more opportunities, not only to kind of address climate change for the planet and the well-being of the planet, but for people too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie. Either of you, Kyle, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Haumataki api, chante washte nape, choose apido. My name's Kyle Hill. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Health, Division of Environmental Health Sciences at the University of Minnesota. I'm enrolled in the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa in North Dakota, and my dad's enrolled in the Siston-Wahpeton Sioux Tribe, so Dakota and the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, which is Lakota in South Dakota. Just really excited to be here today. Just thinking about the intersection of climate change and health. I came into this work in really kind of a roundabout fashion. I got my PhD in clinical psychology. And really throughout my career, I've supported the mental health and well-being of American Indian peoples, Indigenous peoples. I've worked on like decolonizing curriculums for therapeutic modalities. In that way. And very quickly, you learn that much of the mental health issues that are, I want to say, endemic to Indigenous peoples are a consequence of dispossession of lands or forced acculturation and assimilation. And so when I had a chance to really understand a little bit deeper, I just kind of furthered my studies, went back for my MPH, Johns Hopkins, and did a lot of work in the areas of like climate change and health, biological or environmental biology, and took some other courses, and really just started getting more involved in the area of climate change and mental health, and looking at like systems level approaches to interventions, particularly kind of prevention science. And yeah, and I think along that course, I was doing a lot of, I think what most people would consider activism, but I think for our communities, it's really just standing up for, your other than human relatives, which if you remember the NODAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline Resistance Camp and Movement in Standing Rock, Line 3 up here in Minnesota, Keystone XL Pipeline. I was kind of peripherally involved or trying to stay involved with that. But through that, I think you really start to get an idea of, I think, the not only of the issues with climate change, but the drivers of climate change are really the economic indicators that drive our society. But all of that together really undermines the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. And so first, when I started to do this work, it was really looking at how our traditional ecological knowledges and activities can support our well-being, which we really were very selective in looking at which traditional ecological practices or traditional practices were land-based. And so from that work, we recognized that, whatever it is, traditional practices for the tribes up here, they happen to be Anishinaabe, and that secondary data analysis for a larger longitudinal study those place-based activities that we chose were supporting mental health and well-being of the tribes up here. So from that, you know, now I'm getting more opportunities to be involved in what does our connection to nature look like. And many of you are probably aware that there was a report that was the National Nature Assessment that the Department of the Interior then ripped away funding with the Trump administration. Now we're calling it the Nature Record, but it's privately funded now. But that's a national kind of venture joint publication that's going to be coming out. It's a large report towards the end of this year. Um, but it's like opportunities like that now. And so what we're looking at now, and there's been a lot of work in between this. Some of you might be familiar with our work with Nicole Redvers when we looked at climate change and the intersection of Indigenous health and mental health in particular. Um, but so career-wise, especially with this administration, while I'm teaching environmental justice and community engagement here at the U, and um, I'm come from a family of artists, so like as an artist myself, I'm starting to get into how art can serve as like a vehicle to support the kinship for Indigenous peoples or our American Indian communities and their territorial homelands and ecosystems. So really looking at how these very traditional American Indian art forms that for generations and I would say time immemorial, because we just don't have a way of measuring it, but the use of something like porcupine quills to note the types of plants that are medicinal to the tribes around here, right? So that's an art form that might be useful, right? And so right now we're something that I'm super excited about. We're looking at piloting a youth place-based wellness program, and so we're going to use art um, to be able to support that curriculum that's supposed to help support and develop or revitalize that relationship between our youth and local ecosystems. And we're excited because we get to work with a local native nonprofit that has like a restoration space. And so, yeah, that's kind of, it's beautiful work and I love it, but at times it's difficult because I didn't come into this like as an ecologist or anything like that. Just trying to pick up whatever I can along the way. But the beauty of this work is that it's interdisciplinary. And so on one hand, sometimes you feel a little bit like, okay, like where's my spot? But then on the other hand, it's like the work we acknowledge is super interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So it's exciting. So happy to be here with you all. And yeah,
Thank
who's
you so
left?
much, Kyle. And Luisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here with you all. I'm Luisa. I'm from Brazil, so I'm currently based in the US, but my background is in tropical forests. I'm an ecologist. So I've been working in the intersection between climate change and biodiversity and human systems through a transdisciplinary approach. So, my main line of research is trying to understand how climate change impacts both natural and human systems. And by doing that, I work close to traditional communities and also other stakeholders that are involved in this wicked problem. So, considering biodiversity, my background is with lizards and snakes, animals that nobody likes, but I love. But then I moved to a more holistic approach when I start to understand that if I want to save lizards and snakes, I also need to understand how this is connected to our lives, our daily basis, our actions, and I start to understand that considering different perspectives is also important, not only important, but essential to try to move to a more sustainable way of living. So, with that, after my PhD, I started to work closer to those traditional communities, mainly in the tropical environment. So, I've been working with indigenous and riverine communities in the Amazon, also Maya community in Guatemala, and other traditional communities that are that have a different relationship with the environment and a more sustainable way of living. But besides that, they're also the ones who are experiencing the impacts harder. So although they're not the people who are causing all these issues we're experiencing right now, they are the ones who experience those issues in the hard way. So working close to them opened my mind to like different knowledges, different knowledge systems, and how those different knowledge can work together to develop solutions. So that's when I am right now. I'm currently, I usually when I present myself, I of course I present myself as an ecologist, but also as a transdisciplinary scientist because right now I don't think that the scientific knowledge alone can solve all the issues, all the problems we have. We need a different perspective, and we need to create a bridge between those different types of knowledge. And that's where I am right now. I'm trying to do that by connecting to these different communities, connecting to those different knowledge, and putting them together so we can actually move forward.
Gorgeous. Thank you guys so much. So I'm curious, you all kind of work in the community engaged research space. So how do you individually as a researcher define community engagement and what kind of um, like research are you guys doing around community engagement? What does that look like for you? We can start wherever, whoever wants to
Yeah,
hop in.
I can
Kath,
go.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess from my experience, community engaged research is really kind of like a grassroots way to define a problem and kind of co-create solutions where the researcher is really just like a tool for the community. Um, and so the the solutions are really community driven in that sense. So I think when you look at translational science or implementation science, I like that. It seems like those fit a little bit better when we're thinking about community based participatory action research, particularly for like indigenous communities, because I think it's really layered within these communities because, one, you have communities that have been, again, like I said, um, experience like forced acculturation, assimilation. A part of that is not only having your ways of knowing or your epistemologies really kind of stolen or forcibly erased, but in a hierarchical fashion, um, make make the communities think that they're less than these Western Eurocentric kind of ways of knowing. And so I think in that way, when you, particularly for our work, you have communities that have such like a generational approach and knowledge of the land that they're on, that it only makes sense for any researcher to go in to have that type of approach of partnership, of collaboration, not necessarily hierarchical. So when I think about that, that's how I think about community-based research. Now, one of the things I think on a more technical level, or practical level, it's having a community advisory board or elder advisory board. Those are critical because you need to have, folks almost like a board for a nonprofit, um, folks that could help provide solutions real time to any issues happening on the ground. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure what else to provide other than that. And I also think that extends also to data because data has been misused and abused. And I think there's a certain level of violence that has happened to um, the communities that I've worked with in the past because data is, I think, mined. That's really the economic, I think, model by our institutions, um, is that you go and data mine in these communities, and scholars, then leave, whether we call it helicopter research or not, then leave and they make money or get promoted or whatever. And so, the data sovereignty frameworks and approaches that we're doing our best to really support in these projects help prevent that and help, I think, punish any attempts at that. So, just a couple areas where I think community-based participatory research is particularly, I think, supported in ways, again, having an advisory committee, working on, co-created or collaborative efforts, and having a data sovereignty framework to support. I think those are key.
Does anyone want to build on Kyle's?
I just want to complement by saying, like, in the context of my research, um, we I would say that community engagement would be something related to like a collaborative and context sensitive process. Uh, Considering this intersection between traditional and scientific knowledge, it's we need to involve um, and engage the traditional communities into the knowledge production. So we need to not only extract information, which is what like the colonial it's the colonial way of doing it. We instead of extracting information, we need to integrate information, integrate knowledge. So for that, we like the community engagement in this sense would be something more collaborative and like cultural and context sensitive when we are talking about different types of knowledge. So we would value this local knowledge. We will value this the different systems, and that would be the way of engage those communities into the topic, into the subject we are discussing. And also the context dependence is important because we want to solve global issues, but we need to uh, bring that to the local context, what they experience, what they are living in their daily basis, and how they are coping with those topics, how they are coping with those issues. So context dependence is paramount, so we can engage community into this discussion.
Yeah, I'll just first of all endorse all of that. I think these are just super helpful perspectives. One thing complementary that I'll add is just the concept of power, right? So I like to think about power as the ability to achieve purpose. And I think, traditional, what's been described is, models of research that are kind of in our, embedded within these systems that are very power over. So researchers come into communities. I've developed, I've just defined what my purpose is, and I'm here to achieve my purpose. I'm going to recruit research subjects. So even the words that we use, right? The subjects of my research, and I'm going to go extract that data and go publish and get tenure, and that's what I'm incentivized to do. And so, I think what we really need is, and what we're seeing in a lot of places, right, are these shifts to collaboratively defined purposes, to community defines the purpose, as Kyle was saying, and then researchers are here to support that. And also, really looking at where are these divides. So even this idea that some of us are researchers and some of us are community members. Um, One really helpful experience that I've had, helpful and challenging, is doing research on the Marshall Fire, which affected the community, the suburban, fairly well-off community where I live in Colorado. And so that was an opportunity for me to wear multiple hats. So I am a researcher, I am a community member, my partner is a local decision maker. And so, being able to kind of weave all of that together and seeing what happens when we're looking at things from, in a way that combines these different perspectives simultaneously. And so that was, eye-opening to me. And also really, I think, gave me an opportunity to, again, live this thing that I theoretically understood, which is how much more rigorous community engaged research can be. Because when, again, our model that you need to be objective, and so, somehow outsiders are going to do a better job of, understanding a problem and seeing solutions than people who are mired in those problems, is, I think, just completely false. That instead, when you are the one who has experienced those problems, and lives them from day to day, in social sciences, for example, when we're running a focus group, if I'm coming in as an outsider and doing a focus group with a bunch of people who I don't share a lot of history and culture with, I'm going to miss so much of what they're telling me. Whereas, so we're working right now with our community advisory board in this Marshall Fire case. So even though I'm part of the community, there's still, subpopulations that I don't know well. And so, people who, for example, we're going to do a focus group with renters, we need somebody who has that experience of being a renter in the time of a disaster to, be the one facilitating the focus group, or at least asking the follow-up questions that I would miss because I don't have that experience. And so I think just this idea that it's not only ethically better, but that we're gonna do just much better science, and learn so much more, when we authentically engage and have these partnerships.
So I'm going to deviate real quick. So I have a question for you all, because you did actually address my next question, which was around kind of methods and tactics. So we heard some really awesome tactics around community advisory boards. We talked about data sovereignty. There was a little bit of what not to do with data extractivism. We talked about kind of what rigor looks like, and how we might challenge those like conventional notions of rigor, and integrating kind of knowledge. And so one thing that kind of is a quality that we know about community engaged research is that it's very kind of at the local scale, but we know that this issue is multi-scalar. And so we kind of have to kind of scale up at certain times, to be able to address these structural issues. How do you guys kind of navigate that kind of process as a researcher? Sorry, I threw that one in. I was like, I want to know this.
So, if I'm following, like the research that we're doing, there's larger issues, but also embedded within these communities, there's smaller issues that really um, are, again, like layered. Is that what you mean? Is that okay?
Yeah, so like the
Am I
fact that,
following? Yeah,
they're kind of local
yeah,
contextually in nature,
yep,
but that
yep.
they're affected by these kind of large scale structures.
Yeah, yeah. What's interesting, I don't know if it's how long I've been doing much of this work or my age or both. But you start to see that these really like macro level issues are really similar to these very microscopic community level concerns. And so you start to make, um, I guess, analogies or analogous or metaphor or whatever to even like internal like concerns or attributions or like biological or physiological issues with some of these really large issues that are impinging upon our ability to make progress in something like this intersection of climate change and health. Um, and I think something that's helped that is listening to the Bioneers podcast. But it's really fascinating. And I'm like, what if our global economy or even our economy in the US functioned like these like economy in our forests? You know what I'm saying? Like this carbon economy. Like that would be kind of miraculous, you know? Um, and so for my work within American Indian communities and indigenous communities more broadly, as we mentioned before, the need for data sovereignty approaches, right, is because you're looking at issues of justice that are first and foremost kind of critical to creating harmonious collaborations and cooperation with larger institutions. And I too often I find that those what some would consider small issues or in the past, those are kind of like um, passed over in favor of these more critical issues, which, you know, could be, you know, the ecological changes because of drought, you know, or something like that, or these massive, like acute precipitation events that are, you know, mudslide, whatever it is. And I'm just like, these are happening as a result of the treatment of these communities generations ago. You know, so I mean, it's really difficult to look at these, especially with this very the urgency of climate change is causing us to miss these very, I think, um, like these critical opportunities to just develop good relationships. Like in a lot of our native communities, we say, you know, we're just trying to be a good relative. And that ethic behind that is a good way to support like community-based research, one, but two, just to be out in the world. And so when I think about you know, this work, I think it's paramount for anybody listening, but for any of us to really exercise those types of ethics within our communities and our environments, and starting really small and acknowledging the again, like I said, the violence perpetuated or perpetrated upon these communities that didn't allow them to have a voice. And so really supporting that voice in a research project, I think can have these really important kind of cascading effects of, you know, good partnership, good research, and it, you know, could be supported down the line for further for more important critical results. But yeah, it was a really great question. I hope I understood it well enough. But I see that every day, you know, in our I don't want to take too much longer, but even in our institution, you know, I'll get a call or I'll get an email from someone that just wants to work with the tribe. And it's a little odd because I'm like, well, that honestly could take years. But you know, you're asking me just to like connect you with the tribe. And I don't know how helpful that would be, you know, for you or the tribe. And honestly, I don't know all the tribes to begin with. So it's really interesting how we do this work and like we have tenure approaches so quickly, you know. So it's almost like boom, 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 we have to get this work done, which if you look at the urgency of climate change, it gets so big so fast, you know. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like also to contribute. I think the different scales is really a major concern, I think. But in my specifically in my case, the way we are working on that is since we're bridging two types of knowledge, what we do is to bring their perspective to try to bring that perspective to a broader context. So by using scientific method. So for example, um, one of the researches I am developing with a traditional community is regarding the impacts of climate change on the plants that are culturally relevant for them. So, for example, in the Maya community, they use a couple of species of plants as like a medicine, and they have those specific plants that are very important for them culturally, and they are noticing that the phenology of those plants are changing in the places where they collect the plants to do their medicine. So what I'm doing is that based on that local perspective, I am modeling those plants. I'm doing the species distribution modeling of all the plants they mentioned that are important for them in a broader sense. So we are trying to identify climate refugia for those plants, considering not only the place where they collect, but also like Guatemala and also the Central America. And I'm doing something similar with species from the Amazon that are also important to those specific communities and the way they use that locally. And then I am working on ecological niche modeling to understand if those species are actually being affected by climate change in a broader sense, so we can understand if those species are in fact threatened by climate change, or they are like locally threatened in that specific population that the community uses. And that's we with that we can change the scale of the analysis by understanding in a broader sense how those impacts that they are experiencing are in fact impacting the cultural relevance of those species. So that's one thing. Uh, we can also work considering the solutions, for example, the solutions they develop, since they have ways of coping with the issues they face internally. We can use that as um, like as an example and try to apply to replicate those solutions in other systems. So to see if that solution is actually applicable to other places or other environments. And then with that, we can expand something that is a local action to a more regional approach. So those are some ways we are doing this.
I love all of this. Adrienne Marie Brown uses the concept of fractals to describe what I think both Kyle and Luisa were talking about. So fractals are like a mathematical construct where, like, when you zoom into like the smallest scale, the structure looks the same as when you zoom out, right? So it's these repeating patterns. Um, yeah, also called like self-similarity. So like, yeah, the components look the same as the whole. And she, has used this to say, you know, many of us wish that our national democracy looked different than it does right now. So she challenges us to think about how we are each individually practicing democracy in our daily lives, right? With our household members, with our neighbors, like, and so how do we build these social structures that, are we, how can we expect to fix the big when we haven't worked on the small as well? And so I think all these examples, like I love the specific examples you were talking about, Luisa, like are when we how do we work across scales and look at what works here? And it's not that exact thing is going to work in every place, but some of the processes and I think particularly the core principle that Kyle mentioned of like just be good humans, like be good relatives at all of these scales, right? And have that be the basis of the work we're doing. So what does that look like when we're focusing on something that's really like small and community based, and then how do we translate those relationships? Like if we have good relationships with our community advisory boards, then it makes it easier for us to collectively ask, to collectively act and advocate for policies, where we then are building relationships between communities. That's something that I think is also just so crucial right now, right? Is that we're building coalitions, and we may not agree on everything. Like I think we kind of have had this model where like we focus on the thing we disagree about, and if we disagree on anything, then we can't work together. As opposed to where is our overlap? So rural and urban communities. One of the projects that we're doing in Colorado is working with folks in the San Luis Valley and then in urban West Denver. So these rural and urban places. And right now we're like implementing this do-it-yourself air cleaner intervention study and trying to see if this is something that could work in two communities that both feel um, left behind, that both feel overlooked by kind of state power structures for very different reasons, and the way that the livelihoods and the kind of economic drivers in both communities are different, but there's in both cases this real desire for solutions that are community driven and led. And so how can we build those partnerships across communities based on the things that we share and have in common, um, that again, like kind of build us towards a society that when we say this is for everyone, that it actually is, and it's actually working for all the communities.
These were some beautiful answers. Thank you so much for listening to my question. So I do want to invite participants right now to submit any questions that you'd like. And as kind of those questions come in, I'm actually going to ask another question. And I think this is may or may not be relevant based on how you do community engaged research and what kind of matters to you as a researcher. But I'm curious for, advising folks that are wanting to kind of solve public problems like this. How do you engage with policy as a researcher, and what role does policy play in your research process, if at all?
I'll take another turn going first. So I think a lot about policy. I actually think the way that I've thought about policy has changed a lot, partly because of my teaching. So when I was hired into my current position as an assistant professor, I took over our policy class, and I was like, oh, how do I want to teach policy? And right away, what I decided is I didn't want to teach policy in a way that was like, here's the Clean Air Act, remember, memorize all of its statutes. Like, what I wanted was to teach students how they can get involved in policy. And so that actually, like, I was like, I don't really know how policy works at the state level in Colorado, but that seems like a good thing for us to learn together. And so over the 8 years that I've now taught the class, that's really where I focus a lot is, we go to the Capitol, we sit in on House hearings. I have the students do a policy watch assignment where they follow a bill and they have to give testimony on it throughout the semester. And so that's been just this great, again, learning process for me. I feel like I know so much more now because it was important for me to find ways to teach this not in the abstract, but something that's really really hands-on. And through that process, I have been able to like build relationships. It really goes back to that, right? Like understanding that as a researcher, if I go publish a paper, no policymaker is ever going to read it. But if I have a relationship with a policymaker, um, and they know some of the things that I do and that I'm interested in, I was be able to kind of through some of this relationship building, connect with a coalition of folks that were working on this Colorado Environmental Justice Act, and they had questions about, how should we define a disproportionately impacted community? I actually didn't really know the answer, but I knew some people in my school who might, and so pulled in, a colleague of mine, Ben Allshouse, to generate some GIS maps of different, ways that we could build that definition. And so being able to like be that bridge into like, okay, who else, what other researchers might have that information that's needed right now. So I think there's a real opportunity. I think that it's definitely the case that policymakers are pressed for time and really care deeply about a lot of the problems that we care about. And so just taking the time to build those relationships with individuals so that they, like communities, can come to us as a resource, as opposed to thinking that just like, if we think something's interesting and then publish a policy brief, somebody's going to be like, oh, never thought of that before. Like it doesn't usually happen that way, but that dialogue and those relationships, I think really can lead to policy change.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I have been working in science governance and diplomacy specifically for a couple of years now, working close to like international organizations and also trying to connect with government and um, institutes that are more into the decision making part of the job. So that's important to learn. It's an important skill to learn when we are talking about like wicked problems, like science diplomacy and communication skills and how to create that relationship that Katie was talking about. So I think about collaborative and collective leadership a lot because when we become leaders in those organizations, in those institutes, in those that helps us to connect and to create those bridges. So learning how to communicate to other sectors, to other stakeholders, and as Katie was saying, if you publish a paper, that's great in the academic environment, but people will not read that. Like just other scientists will read that. So if you want that result, the results we are presenting in that paper to actually do something, we need to change the way we are communicating it. And for that, we need to learn how to do that because over our academic career, we are focused on learning how to test hypotheses and present those results in a paper or in a conference. We are not learning how to communicate well, how to create, to build those relationships. And it's a trust relationship. You need to build that trust, and for that you need to understand the other side of the story. And sometimes we have the solution for the problem, but that solution doesn't include other perspectives. And that's what when like the transdisciplinary approach comes, because I spoke here about traditional communities. I focus it like my what I was sharing here on traditional communities, but that also means to learn how to communicate and how to exchange ideas with decision makers, with people that are in policy making. So that's important, and we need to learn how to communicate. I think that's the main message of this: how to to create a dialogue, a good dialogue. And of course they will have a perspective that sometimes is not what we want to listen to, what we want to hear, but we need to reach a common sense. And for that, we need to learn diplomacy. We need to learn how to present our points without attacking and without creating a problem instead of creating more solution, like a feasible solution.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take just a just a minute. I know with all of these intersecting issues happening in our world, and the current administration, really just, if we're just talking about the Inflation Reduction Act clawing away funds from tribal communities, that's been a huge, I think, um, huge problem because of the amount of time that it took to be able to get that funding in the first place, and for tribes to figure out that they're not getting these funds for their climate resilience or mitigation or adaptation projects. But I think um, it was around, I think, 2023 maybe. So this Biden administration was still in there, but there were so many times as an academic where I felt I wasn't doing enough. And mind you, this was, I've been based in the Twin Cities. So we had COVID, George Floyd uprising, the murder, and then we have this huge issue of climate change just kind of hovering over our heads. And then I'm dealing with, our concerns as American Indian peoples, just, being or existing in the US. But um, when there were so many opportunities for like resistance movements, and feeling like I'm not doing enough, I can't be on the front lines here. I can't do this. I can't do that. I had a daughter in 2022, but I remember going to this, it was an action camp that taught, these different aspects of nonviolent direct action, but participating in that and then learning about the different points of like where you disrupt, whatever, you know, violent regime or whatever movement, let's say it's the extractive industry, like big oil, right? And so what I learned was that there's so many different points for us to disrupt their business as usual, right? One can be on the front lines. We can have blockades. We can, drop banners for creative resistance or whatever. But one of those points that we talked about, which made me feel better, was at this policy level, when we create this rigorous science, community-based research, that people can't ignore that. Like that's part of the body of literature that then they have to comb over to develop this understanding of the issue at hand or at large. And so I think just that, leaving folks with that understanding that, when we're doing research, it's no small amount of work. Of course, it's a large body of work in itself, but it has huge impact or can have huge impact, especially when we follow it along to translate it into policy. But that was particularly, I think, impactful for me when there's so many points in our lives where we feel like we're just not doing enough.
Thank you so much, guys. So, reminder to folks, if you have questions, please submit them. I do want to ask you all, so our last session is focused on cultivating climate hope, which I think is particularly poignant after we've kind of talked about all the ways that we're trying to kind of combat climate change and its effects on health as a wicked issue. So I'm curious, what gives you all hope in doing this research? What keeps you going in the everyday of kind of moving forward with this research?
Um, I think, I think learning more about the resilience of some of our ecosystems and some of these species gives me hope. Like one big effort that we're doing in the Northern Plains is buffalo restoration. And I think as I learn more about their impact on these like prairie grasslands, for biodiversity, and like the buffalo for our tribes are a very important like spiritual kin, like kind of relative for us. And so, you know, and this is, I think, seeing at other scales too, but just when we take this small, simple thing, it's like, we're restoring buffalo to these prairies and grasslands where they were historically, there was a mass, there was like a genocide, right? In the early 1900s, when they were laying the railroads, the government subsidized um, just normal, regular townspeople to slaughter buffalo to where they were almost extinct at the turn of the 20th century. And so now to see this proliferation, you know, is really beautiful, right? And I think, also when we do like a buffalo harvest within our communities, there's so many aspects to it. There's ceremony, of the harvest, and then there's a lot of language learning. So you're seeing language revitalization practices happening. And then you're learning how to like clean hides or butcher a buffalo and offer those, that sustainable kind of food agriculture to the community. So I think just that, it gives me hope, and then seeing like my daughter being involved in this language revitalization and seeing these things culturally, spiritually, relevant kind of experiences, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think what's also testimony to that in a really twisted way is to see um, just the scope and the scale of barbarism in our world right now, I think is a testimony to that hope. Because I think what they're seeing is that there's a threat here to this global dynamic, and there's a shifting happening that's making us so uncomfortable, that like we have to stamp it out. And I think as ugly and barbaric and just, I have a hard time waking up every day because I see some of these things. Um, but I think that speaks to the threat of this hope, and so yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, just to quickly like reemphasize that point, I think like what happens in a crisis is that we come to what is it that we really need, right? And Rebecca Solnit has done some beautiful work showing that, in a crisis, what people do is they step up to help each other. Like we understand that like my neighbor needs something, I'm here to help them. And so I think in this moment of deep, deep crisis that we're in, we have an opportunity to come back to like, what do we actually need as humans? And so much of what we need is connection. We need connection to each other. We need connection to our planet. And so I think that gives me hope because, I think this is kind of what I was hearing Kyle say is that the state we're in right now is not tenable. We are needed, right? Like it is deeply crucial, meaningful work to build our way out of this. And we don't have to do it alone. There are lots of people who want to, who are in this together. And so the need is for us to connect and find these pathways towards a better future tomorrow. And we don't really have a choice. And so we have to do that. And that gives me hope because I think we will. I don't think there's another option.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that. I think the sense of collectivity is what gives me hope because the feeling that we are not alone on this. When we meet other people who are also working towards these changes, and you see that you're not alone. I think that's what keep us like with hope that things will get better.
So thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives today. I just want to remind participants as we finish out that our next session will be on community engaged teaching and learning. And so we'll be looking at this issue through that lens in particular. So if that's something that is of interest to you or that you want to share with your colleagues, we'll be here next week and having that conversation. But thank you all again for your honestly beautiful expertise. This was really lovely to get to the opportunity to talk to you all. Yeah, so that's all I have for you all, but thank you all for coming, attendees, and thank you all for participating in this conversation.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Be safe. Yeah.